Welcome to The Debate. Today we are diving into, well, one of the core challenges of intellectual life, reading. Specifically, how much of our own identity should we sacrifice to truly understand an author, and when must we assert ourselves against the text? It's a tension, I think, we all feel every time we open a challenging piece of writing.
Yeah, this tension is critical, and the source material really forces us to confront it directly. Does reading exist primarily for the, resection of external knowledge, or is it fundamentally an internal transformative act?
Exactly. So the central question we're wrestling with is this. Does rigorous reading require empathetic engagement with the author's perspective, treating the process, as the material puts it, like a complex social interaction, or must we prioritize the assertive act of making a mark by challenging and filtering the text through our own established views?
And I'll be arguing today that the ultimate value of reading lies squarely in the reader's active, assertive engagement, and crucially, the resultant new framework they construct for themselves.
Okay, and I will maintain that effective reading prioritizes that complex social interaction first, demanding deep and charitable engagement with the author's voice before any critique can really be valid. So my central argument is that reading should first be treated like a complex social interaction, where we genuinely engage with the person behind the words. This demands what the text calls intellectual charity. Practically, this means suspending your immediate judgment, right? Operating under the assumption that the author genuinely has something valuable to teach you.
Okay, intellectual charity. But what's the practical utility of making that initial assumption? I mean, why start there?
Well, because it shapes the entire reading experience. You must, as the text says, follow the author's voice as you move along, believing the author is a person with something substantive to say. That willingness to engage deeply with the other is what elevates reading beyond simply, scanning for facts or locating an author's purpose. It makes it a dialogue, which is necessary, I think, for genuine intellectual growth.
I appreciate the idea of intellectual humility, I really do, but I come at this from a slightly different angle. While interaction certainly occurs, the real value of reading, for me, hinges on the reader's willingness to exert effort toward internal transformation. The source material states it pretty clearly. Reading involves a fair measure of push and shove. You make your mark on a text.
That phrase, make your mark, it's powerful, definitely. But I worry about what happens before the mark is made.
Well, look, active reading requires you to filter the text through your own predispositions and begin to speak almost immediately, whether that's internally, alongside the author, or maybe against them, but critically, always for your own agenda. The measure of successful engagement isn't how well you summarize the author, right? It's how profoundly the material shapes and challenges your thinking and your existing framework. That's the payoff.
Okay, let's dig into that a bit. Let's start the core debate by focusing on that initial move, the nature of trust versus immediate filtering. I agree filtering is necessary, of course, but the non-negotiable initial step requires trusting the author's voice. If you start by filtering through your own existing views, how do you ensure you are responding to the actual text and not just sort of projecting your own assumptions onto it? We must momentarily turn your predisposition over to the text to begin responding to what the author truly meant.
That hinges on an assumption about the reader's internal motivation, doesn't it? I disagree that trust must necessarily precede self-assertion. I mean, if we prioritize merely following the voice, don't we risk positioning the reader as, and I'm quoting here, the reader as a term paper writer? Someone just looking for information to dutifully report or summarize. That's not deep engagement. The act of filtering is the act of immediate critical application. And look, if the text can't be immediately filtered into my own framework, that itself forces a return to the text to ensure I haven't understood the core premise. It's a check. The goal isn't to internalize the author's structure, but crucially, to construct your own predisposition.
But that assumes the reader's own framework is already robust enough to be the primary filter from the get-go. What if it isn't?
Well, the consequences of failing to assert one's own identity are, I think, clearly illustrated in the material through Richard Rodriguez. His whole scholarship boy journey, it shows the emotional cost of reading when new knowledge creates a painful rift between the reader and their existing community. His academic success created difficulty and separation from his family. This suggests, to me at least, the anguish resulted not from a lack of empathetic reading, but from the failure to integrate that knowledge, to truly make his own mark and synthesize the new learning into his identity.
Interesting. I see why you think that, but I would frame the Rodriguez struggle differently. I think the anguish stemmed from the social difficulty of translating and sharing knowledge across cultural divides. The problem wasn't necessarily a failure to filter, it was the sheer difficulty of making the other's perspective understandable to his home community. That translation process necessarily requires the deepest possible understanding of the author's perspective, which is the very core of what I'm calling reading as a social exchange. The pain, perhaps, was the social cost of deep intellectual engagement itself, not some failure of self-assertion within the reading process.
But the integration is the self-assertion, isn't it? And let's look at the ultimate tool for integration, writing. My argument that reading culminates in assertive mark-making is strongly supported, I feel, by the material when it states, readers learn to put things together by writing.
I agree that's a powerful insight.
Right? Writing is the ultimate mechanism for revision, for self-reflection, and for synthesizing one's interpretation. Think about what happens when you write an essay. You are forced to, quote, go back to what you have read and find phrases or passages that define what for you are the key moments. The writing process forces the creation of a clear, structured argument that is defined by the reader's own agenda. This proves, I think, that reading's purpose is ultimately the preparation for the reader's creation, not just the interaction itself.
Okay, I agree that writing is essential for structure, absolutely. But I think writing serves as the proof of successful deep interaction, rather than being the ultimate goal in self. Writing forces the reader to assume a position, to say something to you, as the text puts it, to speak back to the work, whether you're agreeing or disagreeing. That demonstrates that you have internalized the author's voice sufficiently to actually engage with it directly. When you write, you show the quality of your prior social exchange with the text. The writing, in a sense, validates that the author was genuinely heard and understood before you started building your own thing.
I agree writing is proof, but I'd argue it's proof of the reader's ability to create their own intellectual structure and perspective, which, as I've said, I believe is the highest goal of the reading act itself.
All right, so, to summarize my side, effective reading is fundamentally rooted in, well, intellectual humility and the willingness to treat the text as a complex social dialogue. We must ensure we genuinely hear and engage in that social exchange with the author's voice before we assert our own agenda.
And I remain unconvinced that purely empathetic listening is sufficient or even primary. For me, the enduring value of the material lies in the reader's capacity for assertive engagement, filtering, challenging, and making their own mark. It is through that assertive, self-driven process that the reader is ultimately able to construct a synthesized understanding and genuinely, as the text suggests, see the world from his viewpoint, but crucially integrate it into their own.
Yeah, I think the real value here is recognizing that reading is rigorous precisely because we have to constantly manage this tension, this back and forth between listening and speaking back.
Absolutely. We both agree, I think, that the most demanding intellectual work often resides in that exact tension, balancing the need to charitably receive knowledge with the necessity of assertively constructing one's own understanding from it.
Indeed, and that necessary tension is fully present throughout the source material. Thank you for this robust exchange.